Hello, I'm Victor James, author of the Megacosm, and welcome back to my channel. So in my intro video, I briefly spoke about modeling my universe off the Valiant comic universe of the 90s. I wanted to do a quick deep dive into that by what I meant, what you can expect from my stories. So for those who don't know, the Valiant universe was an independent comic universe that took the comic world by storm for a few years in the 90s. It was run by Jim Shooter, who was an absolute genius when it came to comics and marketing. Jim became ready for Marvel when he was just 14 years old, when he sent them his script and hid his age. He went on later to run Marvel for a time, and during that time, some of the greatest storylines were created in Marvel history. But I don't want to get too deep into Jim Shooter's history, as there are plenty of videos that already do so, such as Young Rippa, whose Rippaverse models a lot of Jim's customer-focused ideals. So I will go ahead and watch his videos, because he actually breaks down really well the genius of Jim Shooter and why he's so revered in the comic industry today. So back to Valiant. So there are a lot of historical videos about Valiant as well, but I want to give you the perspective of what a customer saw with Valiant Universe at that time. So comic shops in the 90s were basically the Wild West. I'm a military brat, so I was stationed a lot overseas, and so my comic shops were run by the base. So there just wasn't really enough comics to do pull list, so it was basically first come, first serve. So when I didn't get that comic that I wanted in the shop, I sure was on my bike riding to the shopette, which was basically a 7-Eleven, and checking out the spinner rack and praying that somebody didn't bend the top corner of that comic. You know what I mean. So for me, every place we got stationed, I always made it an imperative to form a relationship with the bookstore manager every place we went, just so I can get that person to sometimes pull a book for me on the side, or sometimes I would actually get my mom, who was awesome, to wait in line while I was in school to get certain comics. So this was the 90s. This was before the internet. So my mom used to always joke about all those sweaty men who would be standing in line, and she was wondering why they were not at work. That is comics, I had to explain to her. So back then, just as now, comics were mainly Marvel and DC. New comic lines were hard to start up and even harder to maintain. Even Marvel's new universe failed to catch on, only lasting a few years before dying off. So for me, being overseas, and I would just see random independent comics in the bookstore, and they were almost triple the price of the big two, which was really hard to justify putting my money in because I just had a paper out at the time. But then came Wizard magazine. So Wizard was an all-encompassing comic guide that not only highlighted the big two, but gave independent comics some shine. Wizard would have a top 10 list that actually moved the needle for speculators. You can blame Wizard about the speculating craze that started since then and actually led to the comic book bust, but that's a story for another day. Either way, the top 10 list actually moved the needle, and it started featuring Valiant comics over Marvel and DC, which was unheard of at the time. So this actually got Valiant rolling, and actually gave it a foothold in the comic book industry, and piqued my curiosity because I've never seen the top 10 list feature comics that weren't Marvel and DC. So I just had to start digging into this universe a little. But before I move on from Wizard, I wanted to give a special shout out to their Mort of the Month section, which basically roasted hilariously bad characters at the time. You can actually read their Mort of the Month on their Instagram, which I highly suggest you do because they're just hilarious if you like comic book characters. But thanks to Wizard, that's when the Valiant universe started to take off. So Valiant was this universe that burst into the scene with new characters that I had never heard of before, and they had vibrant covers that drew you in. I loved that the covers were kinetic, which I mean by they had action on them instead of just poses that didn't match what's inside the comic, which was popular at the time. Valiant even became so popular that they were able to release a pure black cover that almost instantly shot up in value. I remember I used to see this on the wall behind the cashier's desk, which basically meant that they were going to upcharge you for it, and I actually never got a copy of it. But the excitement for Valiant was real. But even with that excitement, it was still hard for me to jump in because, believe it or not, $1.75 was a high price point for a comic. On average, I was paying 75 cents and maybe making 25 bucks with my paper route. So it was just hard to justify making that purchase. But then word of mouth was just so strong for this universe. Comic shops were selling out left and right. Valiant didn't have enough prints for me to even get the bookshop manager to pull some from the side. Competition was fierce to get these comics, and I was just a little boy trying my best to start my collection, so I had no chance against these adults who would just stalk these stores and get these comics before I had a chance to even see them. But then I got lucky. I was finally able to catch on to the whole Valiant universe when I got Harbinger #1. Believe it or not, even though I had a great copy of New Mutants 87, which was the first appearance of Cable, this comic was one of my most valuable at that time, and I was finally able to see what the hype was all about. And what I saw was a universe that was real, gritty, violent, but also with meaningful storytelling. Heroes like Solar were strong, but he could be hurt, and when he was hurt, that often led to others being injured because of his power. I also like the fact that some characters had powers, but some of them had to use other characters' powers to enhance them, such as this scene where Solar was attacked by the Harbingers. So the Harbingers were the name of the comic, but the Harbinger Corporation was actually the bad guys. So when they attacked Solar, Coil had to diffuse the energy sponge soaked off Solar. For some reason, this kind of use of power blew my mind. I love how the powers had to interact to be most effective. We see it again with the same fight where Jolt had to use his powers on Fort to maintain the force field they had erected over the battle to contain Solar. Those are just two examples, but Valiant was so down to earth with their characters to an extent I had never seen before. Shadow Man was just a guy who sort of became another man when it got dark, but he was just a street level character fighting against voodoo gangsters. Pete in Harbingers, he was very powerful, but often had no idea how to lead his team or use his power. Eric from Exo Man of War was an out-of-time savage who often let his lust overcome his common sense. Believe me, this won't be the last time you see something like this happen to him. And deaths were permanent and final. Rai was a huge character at the time, and he died an honorable death. But when he died, that was it. You never saw this version of Rai again. And the book he died in, Unity, that actually kept going several issues after that. In fact, this Rai's blood was used to create a whole new character called Bloodshot, who people see to this day. Most people don't even remember this Rai. Another example is this scene here, and this is what I mean by real powers. When Flamingo realizes Ghost can't breathe in ghost form, she surrounds him by fire. But this is also one of the most heartbreaking deaths I have read in comics. Seriously, this is such a hard way for Torque to go out, alone in a forest in a side battle, and it was so unexpected. There wasn't this long build-up or gimmicky foil cover. The reader had no idea what was going to happen, and it made it such a thrill to read. And you didn't get some immediate revenge story arc afterwards either. The Harbingers were broken by Torque's death. They actually went on the run, and it took another 12 issues before any of his teammates even saw this killer again. But that was just another example of the great storylines that they were telling in Valiant, and that's the kind of storytelling that stuck with me decades later. But anyway, to wrap up, that's how I saw Valiant Universe as a kid, and this is why I want my Megacosm universe to emulate some of those kind of story beats that stuck with me. I want characters whose powers are real but finite, and sometimes they have to be buoyed by others. I want heroic characters who are flawed but still strive to be heroic. If you have a chance, I suggest giving old Valiant a try. You can find many of the comics that I mentioned in bargain boxes at comic conventions these days. Yeah, they had a big fall off. That's a story for another time. You could read my book, Fiasco Adventures, the first book in the Megacosm, and I'll leave the link in the description below. If you want to know more about my universe of the Megacosm, you can go to my website, themegacosm.com, and you can see galleries and read some short stories that I put up there for free. But anyway, I don't want to keep you any longer. God bless you and keep you. That's it, I'm done.